This brain starter is asking for angles that are between 0 and 360 degrees, for negative 60 degrees and 765 degrees. The first thing to note is that for negative 60 degrees, that means that instead of normally going counterclockwise, you go clockwise 60 degrees. And the question is, what angle is at the same point as that? Well, if you go counterclockwise that way, we know the whole circle has to add up to 360. So you do 360 minus 60, and you'll know that this is 300 degrees in a positive direction. Now, speaking of the circle being 360 degrees, 765 is bigger than that, which means it loops around more than once. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 360 and see what I'm left with. This gives me 405 degrees. That's still bigger than 360, so I'm going to take away another rotation, which means this is essentially the same angle as 45 degrees. But it goes around the circle twice beforehand, so it looks kind of like this. It goes around one time, two times, and then terminates right about there at 45 degrees. The angles we found in the brain starter are called coterminal angles, and essentially it means that it terminates in a ray at the same point. So, with this you have negative 135 degrees and 420 degrees. Pause the video so that you can solve these problems on your own. I'm going to give you the answers in 3, 2, 1. The easiest way to solve the negative 135 degree problem is to do 360 minus 135. And that will leave you with 225 degrees for alpha. For the 420 degree problem, you'll see that it wraps around the circle one full time and then terminates at some angle that's equal to alpha. So, like we did before, let's subtract 360 from this, leaving you with alpha equals 60 degrees. That means 60 degrees and 420 degrees are coterminal angles. Likewise, 225 degrees and negative 135 degrees are coterminal angles. Radians are another way you can measure angles, and it's deeply tied into the arc length. So, the measure of the radians equals the arc length divided by the radius. So, if the radian measure is 1, that means that the arc length that it intercepts is the same distance as the radius. So, the real question here is, if the radius is 1, like the unit circle, what is the radian measure for 180 degrees? Pause the video and try to figure that out. You may remember that the circumference of a circle is equal to 2 times pi times the radius. But if we're doing 180 degrees, that's only half the circle. So let's divide that by 2. The 2's cancel out, and we're left with the arc length equals pi times the radius. Well, the radius is 1, which means that pi radians is equal to 180 degrees. This is going to be extremely important when converting between degrees and radians. Here we have two formulas. The first one converts from degrees to radians, and the best way to do that is to multiply by pi over 180. If you're going from radians to degrees, you can multiply by 180 over pi. So, here are two examples for you to try on your own. Pause the video, and I'll go over the answers in 3, 2, 1. To convert 2 pi to degrees, we have to multiply by 180 over pi. You'll see that the 2 pi's cancel out. Then you have 2 times 180, which is 360 degrees, which makes sense since it's 2 times pi, and pi was 180. It's 2 180s, or just 360 degrees. For 45 degrees, you would multiply times pi over 180. And in this case, you get 45 pi over 180. But you can actually simplify this because 45 goes into both 45 and 180. And this goes to a 1, this goes to 4, and you're left with just pi over 4. These problems are asking you to identify the coterminal angle, and then sketch the original and the coterminal angle on the same axes. I'll give you a minute to do these problems, pause the video, and we'll go over the answers in 3, 2, 1. Below you see a sketched 405 degrees. You see it goes around the circle one time and then a little bit more. Let's figure out how much more by subtracting 360 from this. 405 degrees is coterminal with 45 degrees. Roughly about there. The negative pi over 3 means that it goes counterclockwise. So, let's figure out how much it would be clockwise. In this case, one thing you can do, since 2 pi is equal to 360 degrees, or a full rotation, you can do 2 pi minus pi over 3, which will result in 5 pi over 3. Now, what does this all mean? To make these a little easier to deal with, I'm going to convert these to degrees. So first off, negative pi over 3, you would multiply by 180 over pi. The pi's would cancel, and you'd be left with negative 180 over 3, or just negative 60 degrees. So the original angle is 60 degrees clockwise. That would mean you would have to go 300 degrees to 5 pi over 3, which, if you just multiplied by 180 over pi, you'd see this too, equals 300 degrees, and those are the coterminal angles.